It's morning. I wake to the hiss of hot sand blowing against the tarp. There's sand in my mouth, sand in my ears, sand under my fingernails. It covers my blankets and clothes. I sit still for a while and remember my dream, the same reoccurring dream that visits each night, about rain, clear creeks of cool water, a bathtub full to the brim. I reach for the old plastic water jug that someone dropped, with the label on the side, quote, "spring water." The water is hot. I gulp it down so I don't have to taste the plastic. I found a can of cranberries yesterday and dug it out of my backpack. The can opener, while rusty, is still good enough to do the job. I shelter the open can with my back to keep the sand out. Not bad at all, I say out loud. Every once in a while I stop and listen for the sound of gunfire, but today is quiet. Later at twilight, I will make another trip into the suburbs and see what I can find. After breakfast, I read a map I found of the town. There are faded pictures of a lake and happy families going on picnics and listening to concerts. I came across that spot yesterday where the picture was taken. I could tell by the steep decline of the sand that there may have been a lake there once. I found a few pillars of what was once an outdoor concert hall, and even found a seat with a label on it, C214. If there was still a stage, it must be under one of those sand dunes. As the heat of the day increased, I took a few more swigs of the foul water and took a nap. When I awoke, I just lay there on my sleeping bag and listened to the sound of the sand blowing. When it was late afternoon, it was time to make the trek into town to see what I could find. As I walk, I'm careful to avoid the crest of the dune. If any of the gangs are in the area, I would be an easy target, alone, unarmed. I walk between the dunes, using them for cover. When I reach the first house, I stop and listen. No sounds of talking, but I wait to make sure it's safe. I had ransacked the houses on the fringe early on. The big prize in each house is the hot water heater. If it is full, it gives me enough water for months. When the gangs came through, they took the light stuff, bread, nuts, fruit, water bottles, rice, beans. Since they were on foot, they could not haul a lot of weight, so the cans were left behind. No one even thought of the water heaters. Each house is different. Some have the bleached bones of the family dog still chained to the doghouse. Sometimes I find the carcass of a cat inside, or an old aquarium with no water and a few little bones of some kind of small fish on the gravel inside. The dryness preserves things that would otherwise rot in the moisture. They sit there just as they were. 100 years might pass, but the cup on the table, the flower pot on the porch, the morning newspaper on the kitchen table, they just sit there, as if the residents left 10 minutes ago. There are thousands of houses to scavenge from. That's how I survive. I know the drill. A few well-placed hits of the sledgehammer on the lock usually does the trick. Although most kitchen pantries are bare, every once in a while I get lucky and find a can of tomatoes or some dry split peas the family left behind in their frantic attempt to flee. In some of the homes, the traces of violence remains. Bloodstains on the wall, bullet holes through windows and doors. And every once in a while, I find human skeletons, the bones bleached and dried in the pervasive heat. And I also find skulls fractured or riddled with bullet holes. Usually there is no food in these homes. The gangs that roamed these streets at one time took care of that. But the gangs were sloppy. They left things behind, more interested in the violence than even the food sometimes. They always forgot the water heaters. The rolling hills where trees and grass once stood are now denuded. Now they are places where the ever-drifting sand piles up. The sand dunes have a beauty of their own. The ocean is not far away. It was not always like this. When I was a kid, my parents had to drive for 2 hours to get to the ocean. Now I can hear the pounding surf in the distance. I used to go down to the water's edge to see if I could catch a fish or crabs, but mounds of bleached human bones and debris on the beach made me depressed. So I stick to scavenging homes. At one time, these homes must have been something to look at. Sometimes I sat in the sleek black cars in the garage and imagined what it must have been like to roar down the road, windows open, rain splashing on the windshield, a young lady by my side. Sometimes I have a hard time distinguishing what I long for the most, the rain or a woman to hold at night. Back when the Great Migration occurred, I was left behind to fend for myself. Both my parents had been killed in the looting and gang violence. I was just a teenager at the time, too frail to carry heavy loads, so I was no use to anyone. There was already too little food to go around, so they left me behind. I guess they thought I would just die. That was many years ago. The funny thing is, most of them probably died in trying to cross the parched land to Canada. It was too far to walk, not enough food or water, and the violent gangs would ambush parties on the way. In a way, it turned out better for me to stay behind. The gangs moved on, following the herds of people like wolves following a herd of migrating elk, always on the fringe, picking off the slow or sick ones. Sometimes I wonder if my neighbors made it. When I'm done draining the water heater, I found an old bag of split peas and a can of tomato paste. A good day, all in all. I need to make it back before nightfall. Traveling across this wasteland in the howling wind without a flashlight and unable to see the stars, it's easy to get lost and confused. I could probably stay in town if I wanted. Lots of nice homes to pick from, but there's always the risk of gangs passing through, looking for food and water. No one bothers to rob you for money anymore. You can have all the money you want. It's just piled up, sits around the houses and yards like piles of dried tree leaves. When the wind picks up, the dollar bills swirl around the yards and fields and pile up against the sides of houses. I know that at one time people used to work for money, fight for money, save money. Now it's just dried paper, useless to anyone. There is nothing to buy and nowhere to buy it. For a long time, people held on to it and hoarded it. Some people even packed it for the Great Migration to Canada. But it was useless dead weight to carry. If you walk along the interstates, you will find piles of money cast aside, blowing in the wind, alongside the bleached bones of those who did not make it. At night, back in my tent, in the gully, I listened to the wind howl. I remember I used to watch cartoons on TV as a kid. Sometimes for entertainment, I remember those cartoons and relive them in my mind. Without electricity, of course, there is no TV now. Food and water. Food and water. That's what I live for. At night, the howling wind calms down and the desert around me becomes quiet. I know at some point I too will have to move on. Scavenging for food and water in abandoned homes will only go so far. One day I know the supplies will run out and I too will have to follow the interstate north to what is left of the Great Lakes. When the wind is still, there is a deep, pervading silence. I can hear my ears ringing and the pulse beating in my head. Sometimes when I'm bored, I close my eyes and dream. I dream of clear water, taking a bath, taking a shower, raindrops running down my face, having my shirt wet, lying in green grass, the sound of trees blowing in a gentle breeze.